Hi, Peggy.
Hey, Jan, how are you?
Good. Hey, thanks for the note. It reminded me of my father-in-law.
Oh, it did? Why is that?
Well, because my husband, when he was a teenager, his dad would always get on his case. He said, "You do nice work. Not much, but nice."
I love it.
Yeah.
Cute.
Yeah.
Somebody was telling me a story today about they were having a discussion with their 18-year-old who said, "I do everything for you people." And the father said, "Oh, really? What is it exactly that you do?" And the mother's like, "Okay, stop. This is not helpful."
We're not going very far very fast. Right. Oh, yeah. Did I ever tell you? I didn't tell you. When I first met my husband's family, I had a big, I don't know, some sort of reception for somebody's birthday, and I forget what it was. But anyway, all the in-laws and ex-laws and outlaws were there. They were all upstairs talking about the nice shiksa sitting sitting downstairs in the den.
Yeah.
Nice shiksa.
Shiksa, yeah.
Nice shiksa. Yeah, I'm such a nice shiksa.
I have a friend who has blonde hair and blue eyes, and the whole rest of her family has dark hair and dark eyes. And her father always called her their shiksa.
Yeah. Anyway.
Peggy,
Yeah,
that's what my first boyfriend's mom called me. My maiden name is Kowitz, spelled Cowitz, and
is that right?
The Polish name that was Kovich, and they changed it to Ellis Island. But my first boyfriend at UCLA when I was a freshman, his family was so excited because he met this nice little girl named Julie Kowitz, and they all assumed I was Jewish. And I went home. I went home with him for Passover. Oh my God! I learned what shiksa meant. I learned what goyim meant. I learned all these phrases I'd never heard of before because evidently I was the devil. Horrifically convert their son, and I was like, no, not at all. I love Shabbat. Oh my God. It didn't work out between the two of us, but it had nothing to do with Judaism.
So Martha, our actual director, she and her husband often will come over to our rabbi's house with us for a Shabbat meal. And her husband, Martha's family a ways back are Jewish, but they had assimilated. But her husband is not. So we call him our Shabbos goy. So if somebody forgets to turn on the light, we ask Brad to turn on the light. If the oven gets left on, we ask Brad to turn it off.
Oh my God, that's a real thing. That's a real thing, isn't it?
It is a real thing.
Oh, geez.
You pay your dues, you eat the maror. If someone asks you to eat the maror, you eat it. It tastes horrible, by the way.
No, my husband hates it, but I love it.
Oh, hats off to you, Peggy. It's not for me. I'm Italian, Polish on one side, quarter, and then on my mom's side, I'm seventh generation, born in California, Heinz 57, everything extremely pasty from Europe. And so, yeah, I'm a blend.
Yeah, well, I have a weird blend. My dad is Lebanese and my mom's family are French Jews, so it's quite the combination.
You know what I just found out? Hyatt Little?
Yeah.
Well, when we had our equity workshop, the city council, she was explaining how, we went through this touchy-feely thing, and she was explaining when she was growing up, she felt so different because back then she said she looked very, very much Egyptian, and where is she? Aramaic. Anyway, she's Armenian. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was thinking all this time, well, maybe she was Native American. I don't know anything. And so I just, I found out, well, no kidding. That makes a whole lot of sense that she would feel back then, at least she would feel being separated out.
Yeah.
Because you heard looks.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And that's so nuts. That is so nuts.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a lot of people joining. Just so our board members know, Zoom changed the way they have their platform, so that you have to have either a passcode to have a meeting or you have to have a waiting room. And I opted for the waiting room so that nobody had to worry about the passcode, but it means that I have to individually admit every single person. So if you see me distracted, Paula, I'm not sure if you can see that over there. If you click on participants, it'll give you a little column on the right-hand side. Right now, no one is in the waiting room, but when someone is waiting there, it'll show them, and you have to click on admit to admit them into the meeting, just so everybody knows why that's happening. That was not something I chose. It was something Zoom chose.
And then I also just wanted to mention to you, Julie, that partway through the meeting, I'm going to have to jump in the car to go to another meeting. So I'll log off and join you by phone at that point.
Sounds good. And Commissioner Ojero is attending the Willamette Criminal Justice Council meeting until 4:30. So I'm going to give just a brief update that really falls under her purview. So do you see, Paula? It says one person is waiting and it says Reese. If you hover over his name, can you hit the admit button?
Okay, now I'm looking at the list of participants. There's 26, right?
And at the top, it says one person is waiting. Do you see that?
No, it
Julie,
doesn't say.
okay, so Julie, I was the host, and when you came in, I made you the host. So you
Okay.
might need to make Paula an additional host.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna just go ahead and admit it for now and get the meeting started, and I'll work on that for next time.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have a pretty packed agenda tonight, but I'm really glad to see all of your faces. Thanks for being here. And I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can get this kicked off. Okay. Let's do a slideshow to make it bigger for everyone. Just some Zoom housekeeping. You should be muted when you join. You can unmute and you can start your own video. We're going to have a public comment time period in the beginning, up to 10 minutes for any topic. There will be a public comment period on a specific topic in the middle hour of the meeting. So type your name, dash public comment, dash whatever topic you would like to make a comment on, and I'll circle back in a few minutes after I give a meeting overview for that public comment time. Okay. So this is the meeting overview. We'll go over our culture. We'll have the public comment. We're going to vote to approve the minutes and take roll. We have some updates. We're looking at some proposed edits to bylaws, and I will review those with you and you can vote on them. And then we have about 50 minutes to 1 hour for a public feedback session on our priority topic number 2, strengthening crisis response resources with a location that is safe 24/7 for all people. And the last half hour of the meeting, we have an equity training on diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts from our equity consultant, Dr. Jade Aguilar. Okay, just to reiterate our agreements as far as the culture and the conduct that you all want to have on this board, with kindness and inclusivity and respect and open-mindedness. And I'll make sure to abide by that conduct as well. And here we are. I'm seeing something in the chat, so give me just a second to see. Oh, Linda saying hi, everybody. Well, hi back to you, Linda. Love your Southern hospitality. Can I say it in your accent? And here we are in November, and we are in the thick of doing community engagement on our 4 topics. But this is just to remind us of where we are. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing to see if there's anybody who has said they would like to make a public comment. The only thing I see in the chat is from Linda saying hello. I'm going to check and see if we have anybody on the phone. I don't see anyone on the phone, and I want to make sure to let you know, Tim Roach and Blair Gerard, I don't know if you are on the call yet, but that the middle hour from 4:30 to 5:30 is when we're going to have the public feedback and discussion that you messaged me back, that you messaged me about earlier this month. Okay, I'm going to go back to screen share. It doesn't look like we have any public comments, Paula, if you can note that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and vote to approve the October meeting minutes. Can I get a motion from someone on the board, please?
So moved.
Charles, thank you.
I'll second it.
Is that Alita? Do I recognize your? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take roll, and you say here, and I, nay, or abstain. Flip. And I'm going to stop sharing just in case I need to help anybody with their mute button. Flip Anderson, can you give me a thumbs up or unmute yourself?
Hello,
There we go.
and I'm here. And are we doing the minutes?
We are. Do you vote to approve them?
Yes.
Thank you. Lennox.
Here, yes.
Commissioner Ojiro is not here, but she will be here later in this meeting, so you can have her as an abstention. Catherine Bisco.
Here and approve.
Thank you. Carol.
Here and approved.
Bruce.
Here and approved.
Brian.
Here and approved.
Anita.
Here and approved.
Joel.
Here and approved.
George.
Here and approved.
Barbara.
Here and approved.
Alita.
Here and approved.
Nikki.
Here and approved.
Christina. I don't see Christina on my screen, so go ahead and mark her absent. Charles.
Here and yes.
Peggy.
Here and yes.
Jim.
Here and abstain as I was away.
Thank you. Andrea Myrie, I know isn't here tonight. She let me know that she could not attend today. Jan.
Here, approve.
Reese.
I'm here and I approve.
Linda.
Here and approved.
Okay, thank you all so much. The meeting minutes have been approved from last month. Scheduling reminder for next month, we are meeting on the 16th. It is a week earlier than our normal meeting time because of the holidays. I've got a couple quick updates for you that I think will be helpful and important. The Willamette Criminal Justice Council, which is where Commissioner Ojiro is right now, last month voted to create a work group to research and look into a street outreach and response team, similar to a CAHOOTS model from Eugene. And the Willamette Criminal Justice Council has a wide variety of people from Benton County and Lynn County, I believe, and also OSU has been attending because of their interest in helping to build a CAHOOTS model. And that is where Zan is right now. There is an update from the city of Corvallis. The city council meeting on Monday had two pretty key updates. The first one is that they voted to direct city staff to work with Unity Shelter to allow managed camping at the BMX park. And the second big update is that they made the same decision to allow RV and car camping at Pioneer Park. And so they are diverging from the opinion provided by the city attorney, Jim Brewer, and they went ahead and have voted to allow managed camping at BMX and RV and car camping at Pioneer Park. So city staff, Paul Bellotta in particular, is working and reached out to myself and Sarah Hartstein to get some already put together operational plans that the county had been using in partnership with lots of other providers to help support people who have been car camping at the fairgrounds during COVID to try to work off of some of those plans. The last update has to do with Project Turnkey. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen in case there's any questions about this so I can see you all. Project Turnkey is funding that was passed at the state legislature. Sorry, Charles, did you want to chime in?
I just wanted to clarify a little bit about the what happened at the city council meeting. It's
Thank
not
you.
neither of those are set in stone. That was with the initial motions and the intent. However, there were amendments to those motions that now directed staff to come back with kind of feasibility and what the rules would be for both those things. I feel they're going to move forward, but it's not a done deal, so to speak.
Thanks for clarifying that, Charles. I'm sorry if I mischaracterized it.
No, I mean, you're essentially right. Just there's, that slim possibility that once the city comes back with information, the council could say, no, we don't want to do that. But I don't see that happening.
Okay, thanks, Charles.
You're welcome.
For Project Turnkey, the emergency board, what people call the E-board at the state legislature, they're in charge of allocating emergency funds that are not legislation that's passed within the legislature. The E-board just allocates funds immediately. And they passed $35 million for fire affected counties and $30 million in addition to that for the other 28 counties in Oregon who are not considered fire affected counties. And it is allowing counties and local partners to apply for funds to purchase motels for immediate sheltering of people with the long-term goal of transitioning those motels to permanent supportive housing. And we here locally have been working with, Zan, Peggy, Paul Bellotta, Sarah Hartstein, myself, Andrea Myrie, Brad Smith, to pursue the feasibility of a couple different options here in Benton County. To do the groundwork, the RFA should be coming out this week, and we do intend to have some application go forward, but the details of it are still being worked on and we haven't seen what the RFA looks like yet, but a lot of groundwork is being done right now in preparation for it. Any question about those updates? Carol, yeah.
Okay. Did you mean purchase a motel? You're not talking about room. You're talking like buying a motel?
Buy a motel.
Far out.
Far out indeed. Jan.
I know that the split was, I think it was 30 million for fire and 35 for the other, or 30, whatever. But the point is, how much came to the county? How much is coming? And are we sharing it with Lincoln and Lynn?
It doesn't work that way. So they'll release an RFA, a request for applications, and then there'll be individual entities. I think likely in our area, it will be a collaboration with Corvallis Housing First and Unity Shelter with city and county support. And you would apply for those funds, and based on what your application looks like, you could be awarded those funds, but it's not a done deal and it's not a direct allocation to the county. Linda, or sorry, Jan, did you have a follow-up to that?
Right. So after that RFA comes through and we come up short, perhaps, is fundraising? I mean, does anybody foresee that fundraising is going to have to occur? Matching.
I don't know that answer yet, Jan, but I'll keep you guys updated on how it goes. Linda. Oh, I thought you raised your hand. Okay. Any other questions on the updates? George. I can't hear you yet, George, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sometimes it says press the space bar and you can talk, but I didn't mute myself. Since we're doing comments, I just wanted to say thank you to the city staff and to the elected officials here for what they did the other night. It's hard to make these decisions, and what you're seeing is, kind of back and forth between a staff and a council. And I'm glad that they did it. I want to thank them for doing it. There's going to be more votes that are going to come forward. That are going to be hard votes. And I appreciate the work that they've done to get that done and the support that shows to us.
Thanks, George. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move back to the visuals here. Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Does the 30-something million for purchase of motels, I assume that that includes capital for the purchase. Does it include some initial operating funds as well?
You can include some initial operating costs in your application, but it's, it's subject to the application and what they award.
Yeah. Do you have any idea about due date yet?
The RFA should be out this week within the next 5 to 7 business days. They want the turnaround time to be 9 business days, 2 weeks, which is why we're trying to do everything we can right now to lay the groundwork and figure out the logistics of operations. And then they want to get the money out the door in 30 to 70 days. Very quickly for winter sheltering. Okay, we are going to review some edits to the bylaws. Then I'm going to give a little overview of the public engagement that we're doing and share the surveys with the board and anybody else who is attending this meeting. And then we will have dedicated time on priority topic number 2 and our equity training. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. Oh, actually, I did that wrong. I apologize, y'all. Let me bring these up on the screen and go to the next one. All right, so there are 4 main changes for the bylaws, and I will take you through the bylaws in turn for each of these. The first one is really much more of just a technical update. It right now says that minutes will be posted 7 days after the meeting, which was just, I think, a clerical error. It should say 7 days after the minutes are approved. So we'll be changing that to the language that it should be. The second one has to do with term limits. For most board members, there's a 2-year term with a maximum of 3 terms. But there was an area with the executive committee and the co-chairs where there was no language on this topic. It was just silent. And so we would be adding in a term limit for the co-chairs and for the business representative on the executive committee because their role does not change with an election cycle the way the commissioner or the city council role does. The third one is an absence policy for all board members at full board meetings, executive committee meetings, and work group meetings. And I'll go over the details of that. And then the last one is really just a vestige of when we only had the executive committee before the board members applied and were picked. There was language about an executive committee chair, and Charles had served in that role, and it's no longer needed now that we have co-chairs. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Are there any questions about the bylaws changes?
Yes, I have a question. The way I read that first one, I was going like minutes posted. That means minutes that have been approved, right? But when I first read it, I thought you send out minutes and then we look at them and we don't approve them until much later. So what does
that's why, yeah, that's why we're making this change so that it says 7 days after they've been approved.
But you still send out minutes that we look at.
Those are the draft minutes and they're not posted publicly until after you approve them.
Okay, but so the draft would be the adjective that would have described that part. Okay, gotcha.
So I'm going to scroll down here. Here are your bylaws. Okay, so notes from the meeting will be posted publicly within 7 business days of approval of the meeting minutes. That's the first one. Any questions about that? I'm hoping that one is not too controversial. The second one has to do with terms of service. And it begins with members of the advisory board, other than the roll member, shall serve 2-year terms and not exceed 3 consecutive 2-year terms. So that applies to everyone on the board. But we have roll members assigned by position, in particular the county commissioner. And we also have a roll member that's non-elected with CSC. And our non-elected roll member from the business community. And there was no language about any term limit for them. So we are going to add in the same term limits for the rest of the board for the co-chairs and for our business representative. Any questions about this one or issues?
Yeah, a quick question from Jan.
Yeah.
Looking at the tense, it says the non-elected roll members from CSC, the non-elected roll member from CSC serves without specific term limit. Do you want to put an a specific term limit or without specific term limits? It's just a grammatical thing. I don't know if it's correct or not.
I can add without a specific term limit.
Okay.
No problem. Other questions or issues with having term limits for these members added in? I'm hearing none, so I'm going to move on to the attendance policy. And attendance policies are pretty normal for advisory boards. And I took some of this language from other advisory board language from the city of Corvallis. All HOPE board members, including executive committee members, must be able to attend meetings regularly. When emergencies happen, board members will communicate as soon as possible with the HOPE coordinator. Prior notice must be given to the HOPE coordinator if a planned absence occurs. A board member will no longer be able to serve on the board if either of the following occur. Either failure to attend 4 consecutive meetings of any kind, that would be full board meetings, exec meetings, and work group meetings, or failure to participate in any board activities for 60 days. Any questions or issues with this language?
I have a question on that one, Julie. This is Joel.
Sure, go ahead, Joel.
Is the intent, and I absolutely understand and appreciate the need for an attendance policy. Is the intent with those changes that if somebody's unable to attend the meetings in that fashion, even if it is a excused absence? In other words, if somebody's taking care of a sick family member, or if Brian gets shipped off to fight wildfires for 2 months or something like that, even though that would be something that you've been advised of, it would be hopefully considered an excused absence, would that person still be removed from the committee?
I think it's more that we want to make sure that we have representatives from fire and police and all sectors of the community. And if someone really can't participate for 2 whole months and misses all of these meetings, then it might not be the right time in their professional career or personal life to be able to be on a board like this where there is work involved. Deborah Stevens, for instance, said, I have too much going on at home. I just can't show up to these meetings and participate in this way. And that's totally fine. I think it's more to have some kind of delineation. I mean, if you are going to miss, 4 in a row and you're going to miss them because you're off fighting fires and you let me know, okay. And if it's 2 months and no more than that, sure, it's planned. But I think beyond that, we really would miss the participation from some sector of the community. And it would be preferable to have that board position filled.
So even if it's excused, that would still be grounds to have them removed from the committee.
I think that was, the intent, that if someone really can't come for 2 whole months and continues to miss them for whatever reason, personal, professional, just can't be able to attend and participate, that we should be able to fill a board position to make sure we have the manpower to do this work and the representation from the community.
And my concern there is that life happens, especially with COVID and everything else that goes on in life. 60 days, we're really talking about essentially 2 meetings that somebody misses and they'd be gone, even if it was a legitimate reason for being gone. So that's my concern with that amendment.
Do you think it should be adjusted and made more lenient? Because these aren't set in stone. These are the proposed edits.
No, I agree with the timelines, but I think if there's just modifying language, and if there's unexcused absences or it's not communicated or pre-approved or something like that, because we don't want to lose somebody that is making valuable contributions because life happens.
And I have to agree with Joel on that one.
Okay. Do you want to propose an amendment so that there is more flexibility? How would you phrase it?
I would wonder if 90 days wouldn't be better. Just 3 months seems.
What about the possibility of a review after 2 unexcused absences or excused absences? If we use that 60-day benchmark and then, we have a conversation with the executive committee kind of thing. With as much time has been invested by the people that are here, you've got a lot of education and basis for, decisions that are being made. It would be outside the normal circumstances, but if it would allow that flexibility to say, hey, we know there's some circumstances, you've been following up on the minutes and, just a consideration, maybe we can adapt it or leave that option available.
That's what I was going to suggest, is could we maybe make it to where it would be, after 60 days of failing to make meetings, it gets reviewed by at least the executive committee to offer an additional extension, or whether or not it's just somebody who's not attending. If it's for a valid reason, maybe we can say, well, let's, if they plan on possibly being back in another week and they can review attending, something about at least having that review. Not just
I would agree with, I think it was Catherine that said the failure to participate, as I interpret that, in using Joel's example, if Brian has to go fight fires for 2 months, if Brian is reaching out to Julie and saying, hey, I can't attend the meetings, but I did read the minutes and here's my opinion, here's what I want to mention in the next meeting, that's still participation, even if he's not attending the meetings.
How come you just can't, instead of, I don't think having the executive committee review, that potentially could be loaded. Why can't we just say if it's a unexcused absence, it would be blah, 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 versus if it's an unexcused absence, then they can be out. But if it's an excused absence, then this doesn't apply.
Could there be a provision for plugging in a replacement, subject to an approval process, maybe by the chair or something? No.
Well, and I think that's troublesome because we talked about this as well. Because then you lose that knowledge that gets learned over the course of all these meetings. George wants to comment, and Zan is also commenting. I think we need to keep it simple. 90 days sounds good. George, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking along Bruce's lines. I'm wondering if many people are here because they represent an interest and they've been appointed by elected bodies to be here. And so it seems like if you're representing an organization that's been deemed by the elected bodies to be worthy to be there, to be appointed, then we should have a way that if somebody has to have, because their job has to go somewhere else, they should be able to send somebody else in their stead.
So the rest of the board members, besides the 5 role members on the executive committee, are not appointed. They are given their position on the board by the executive committee. So the exec committee already has that appointment authority, so their review doesn't make as much of a difference. How do you feel about making it 90 days? And that's 3 whole months. And I think if someone really can't participate for more than 3 months, that perhaps filling that board position with someone who is able to attend. Reese is saying 90 days better.
No.
I have 2 suggestions. One is I agree with Zan, keep it simple. If we start getting into things like defining what excused means, just because I tell you I'm not showing up for a meeting isn't a very good reason for not showing up at the meeting all by itself. And I don't want to get into that. I think it's just better if someone can't participate for any reason. And we could just make it a little bit longer. After all, most of the board would have lost their positions in the spring when we weren't having meetings, which suggests another edit. And in the very last clause, failure to participate in any board activities for 90 days, I would say failure to participate in any scheduled board activities for 90 days to account for, maybe the pandemic's not going to be over for a while, or later on in the course of our work together, we take a break or anything like that. So
Thanks, Jim. I've made those 2 updates with scheduled. Reese is saying 90 days. Catherine says 90 sounds okay. George, 90 is okay. Nikki, you want to comment?
Yeah, I think someone touched on this, but just if we were defining what it meant to failure to participate in any scheduled board activities. So did that include things like if we had a, email thread where we were communicating, or like previous when we were doing the research and we were kind of working on our own and sending you information? Is that within that? I guess if we could make that clearer about I know now we just added scheduled board activities, but I guess what are we defining as the activities?
Probably meeting. So changing activities to meeting, failure to participate
Okay.
in any scheduled board meetings.
And that would also be like the work group, the smaller meetings. Okay, thanks.
Yes.
And one more thought, Julie, in the spirit of keeping it simple, I think if we're just going to say 90 days, we can maybe dispense with the first part that talks about 4 consecutive meetings. There could be a circumstance where we have 4 meetings with subcommittees and whatnot in 30 days. So I think the 90 days would be the better keep it simple option.
So take away the first one, and just if someone can't participate for 90 days.
So if you're on a subcommittee and executive committee, you could ostensibly have 4 meetings in a period of 1 month.
Okay. How do people feel about taking away that first one about the 4 consecutive meetings? I saw a thumbs up from Jim, agreed from Nikki.
I think it might be good to keep the parentheses though and put it next to meetings on number 2.
Good call, Lennox.
Just so it describes which kinds of, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, just making some edits here. Okay, so final wording here. A board member will no longer be able to serve on the board if they fail to participate in any scheduled board meetings for 90 days, full board meetings, executive committee meetings, and work group meetings. Okay. I'm gonna move on to the last one. This is about deleting the executive committee chair because it's no longer needed now that we have 2 co-chairs from the full board. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and ask if there's any other questions or tweaks that you want to make before we vote on these bylaw amendments. Okay, hearing none. I'm going to go ahead and share this. And we will need a motion to adopt these changes with the wording that I put in there.
I move to approve as written.
I heard a couple voices. Joel?
I think George may have beaten me to it, so I'll second it.
Okay, George makes the motion, Joel seconds. Because there was a good amount of consensus, I'm just going to stop sharing and say all those in favor, please say aye or hold up a thumbs up.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, please put your thumbs down or say nay. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you all for your time on that. Christina has also voted aye. Thank you, Christina, for the text. All right, so our priority topic areas. I'm going to do a little review of what we are doing for public engagement. So you all voted last time to adopt these 4 priority topic areas, and you met separately in your work groups to put together some surveys. And we are in the thick of community feedback at meetings, community listening sessions, the surveys, in-person feedback. And just so you all know, today and tomorrow, I'm dropping off hundreds of client surveys to 8 different providers in Benton County that are doing in-person work with clients. And thanks to the funding from Peggy at CSC, I was able to purchase gloves, hand warmers, socks, and batteries and distribute them to these 8 different providers so that they can give a thank you item for people who take this in-person client survey. So I'm going to go ahead and share the Hope Advisory Board website with you all, if I can find it here. Give me just a second, apologies. Okay, here we go. I want to make sure you all know where to look for these surveys, and you can tell people where to look for these surveys. So here's our regular HOPE website. If you Google Benton County Homeless Housing and HOPE, this will come up. And if you scroll, here's HOPE Community Feedback. Visit the HOPE Community Engagement page. So you click on this link for community engagement, And here we have our 4 priority topic areas that people can read through. And just yesterday, the surveys went live. And thanks for the feedback from some of you who went through and did the surveys and helped me make them better so that they are more user friendly and we fixed some mistakes. So thank you for that. But this is where the surveys are. And I've been explaining to a couple different community partners that 3 out of the 4 are very short and will take you about a minute to a minute and a half. And that the third one has more questions, although it will take you fairly quickly to go through them. Because of the need to understand community sentiment as far as support and level of concern with a variety of different topics for different types of transitional options. And so that's why we have as many questions as we do there. We've got a community partner page. So if you click on this list of community partners, it will take you to the spreadsheet that I have made with Corvallis organizations, of rural Benton County, outside of Corvallis organizations, government, culturally specific providers, and then one for Corvallis providers. There's homeless service providers, assistance providers, developmental diversity, so that people can see everyone who is being engaged. And then at the bottom here, we have our upcoming community partner events, which is really meetings that I am attending. The one that's coming up is this Friday. We're doing a public feedback session with Monroe service providers and service providers for our Hispanic community members. And then at the end of this month, I'm hosting a separate session just for the West Hills Neighborhood Association for them to give feedback on these priority topics. Any questions about our website? Yeah, George.
Just a question about the surveys, and I may have missed it somewhere along the line. You may have sent out. How are we getting those out to people, or how are people becoming aware of them?
That is a wide effort. We have a press release going out today or early tomorrow from our Joint Information Center with the city and the county. I have been releasing blurbs to a variety of community providers so that they can share it on social media. I'm attending lots of different meetings like the NAACP meeting next month, city council meetings for Philomath and Corvallis, a variety of different ways to publicize this, to share the link, and then to have those organizations email out the links to them for their membership for people who might not be on social media. And then with the press release that goes out hopefully tomorrow, our media outlets have said they'd like to cover this as well.
Thank you.
And Joel, I still need the contacts for Elks and Rotary.
Yes, I will make a note.
Thank you. You go ahead and just email them and CC me, and I will take it from there.
Would it be simpler if I just simply sent them the links?
I think I would love to offer to attend any meeting they would like me to, or host a community listening session for their membership. So go ahead and put me in touch if you feel comfortable doing that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share again. So we are going to dive into community feedback, and we are about right on time. We will have 45 to 50 minutes to talk about Hope Priority topic number 2. But I wanted to touch on a couple of questions that I have gotten. Oh, Nikki, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, are the listening sessions, like the one I think it said it was on the 30th, are those going to be recorded for those of us that can't attend, but to hear the public comments?
I can record them and make them available if you would like that.
I would like that, if possible.
Yes.
Anyone else also wants that?
I am still having our IT department and our public information officer and support staff at the health department figure out how to host 2-hour-long meeting videos. That has been in progress for a couple of months now. It's evidently not simple. And so we're still working on how to host these videos so that people can watch them. Okay, so how did we arrive at this priority topic? What kind of public feedback does the Hope Board need? And what can Benton County or the city of Corvallis do as far as what is within their power? And so how should we shape our policy recommendations? So as we all know, the bylaws are driving this, and that's how we arrived at these priority topics, looking at our data on our vulnerable populations and the safety concerns and the racial and ethnic disparities that we're seeing. And the Hope Board ultimately will be making policy recommendations to the city and the county. Give me just a second, Catherine, and then I'll get to your question, okay? And who's on the Hope Board? I'm including this so that it'll be posted in the PowerPoint that we post to the website afterward, because I keep getting this question about who is on the board and setting the agenda and doing the research. So I've included this for people who view this later. Give me a second here. There we go. And what can Benton County of the city of Corvallis do with policy recommendations? They can make code changes. They can allocate funding from some limited public funding streams. They can make decisions about staff time that is spent on topics by adopting and supporting policies. And then they can adopt a plan that has near consensus in the community that can be used to leverage additional state, federal, and private dollars. You are not OSU faculty, Barbara. I will update that. Why don't you email me offline and let me know your current title? And I will update that.
Will do.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so before we get into this, Nikki, you had a question? No, Catherine had a question.
I do. So when I don't know if everybody else is getting this same situation happening, or maybe it's just my search engines. When I go to a general search, say I don't know Hope Board, or I can't remember quite the name or the link or where we should be looking, I'm getting the Hope Advisory Board link, and I'm also getting the Hope Community Engagement link. And the Hope Advisory Board one brings me to a calendar that's got June 22nd, 2020 on it, but none of the surveys. And so I'm wondering if just from if other people are getting that result, and if we have people looking for it, maybe are ending up in the wrong place. So that's just one question. The other one is do we have, I know there's ways, but are we looking at gauging as we do the press release, and there was a fantastic presentation with City Speak last night. So bravo to everyone that participated. Are we following what kind of results we're getting in public feedback through these surveys in any way?
Yes. So in here, I'll stop screen sharing so we can discuss this. In January and February, I'm going to be going through the survey feedback. And I also am taking on an intern who starts the first week of January. She is a senior at OSU in public policy with a minor in entrepreneurship. And I'll introduce her to the board in December. And she's going to be helping comb through some of these survey results and put together visuals to help display the results that we're getting back. And also put together like sort of executive summaries of what the survey results are telling us to be able to share with the board, and also to take some of that workload off my plate and expose her to community-wide collaboration and coalition building and public policies. And she would like to do research on policies that help address health equities. And so she wants to do that. Linda, do you have a question? Or are you just waving hi to me? All right, there was another question. Anything else? Jan, you?
Okay. Yeah, my question is in chat if you want to take a look.
Oh, about the representation from the community?
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure the best way to do that other than publicizing it and sharing it with memberships of a diverse spectrum of the community, making sure to have client surveys come from diverse providers throughout Benton County. And I do know which ones will be coming back from the providers because I'll be picking them up or being sent them electronically, and knowing how many surveys have been collected by Casa Latinos Unidos or Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center. We also have a racial and ethnic question and gender identity question on the surveys for clients. So we will see that kind of representation too.
I was just going to say, if you won't recognize bias if it, or will you? If so, in other words, if you know how surveys are, especially some surveys, you may end up with, you know, a component of, or a faction that are going to load the responses. And I was just wondering, do we have fail safe so that won't occur?
not that I have built into it, but why don't we talk about possibilities, especially with that email you sent about the OSU resources on this? So why don't we follow up after this meeting about how we could work on that?
Okay.
Okay. And I've noted the search engine problem, Nikki and Catherine, and I'll look into that and see if we can have a better search come up when people Google this. Okay, so we are going to get into feedback on this Hope priority topic number 2. On the website, the 5 questions center around these 5 areas. And Zan, do you think I can pass it over to you to talk about the questions that we have and the reason behind them?
Sure. So with respect to this first issue, our vision really is to have some sort of a service center model as recommended by our best practices group, where we can have multiple service providers in one place that address the needs of any particular individual that is unhoused, and that also serves as that emergency location for people to sleep and to be when they are unhoused. So that is a big and complex issue. It's ambitious. So we're asking a lot of questions about what the attributes of a site be for a co-location of services. Should it be, multiple sprawling acres in a campus-like setup, or should it be very centrally located in a dense part of town? What services do we want to have co-located in one place? So all of those are represented in the survey. Also, what populations do we want to serve? And if what we meant by this one is in terms of the emergency sleeping arrangements. We know that we have a men's shelter and a women's shelter, but we don't really have any place for couples to go. We don't really have a place for people that are that don't identify as male or female to go. We don't currently have a lot of good ways to provide culturally specific types of shelter. For instance, families may have completely different interests and needs in terms of safety and support than a population of men that are not without, with no sobriety checks. So can we house everyone in one place and have a big enough property that has different attributes or different dorms or different, setups for that? So what other kind of amenities might we want to have? When we had the model presented of this kind of a campus approach for North Corvallis a couple of years back, some of the amenities that were discussed were a garden or a computer lab so people could put together resumes and apply for social service funding or for one thing or another, and some educational courses. And then what kind of services would there need to be, or assurances would there need to be for the surrounding community near any sort of a service center? How should that service center operation interact with neighbors, whether businesses or homeowners or anyone else? So those are the questions that we were trying to get at. We know that these are many of the kinds of questions that have come up anytime we discuss this sort of a service center function. So I'm hoping that we will get good suggestions or good feedback. We have open-ended questions as well, so people can express themselves beyond just doing the check, check, check kind of an approach.
And we're going to go through each of these 5, but we're going to start with the first one about co-location of services. And I think we have some members of the public who are attending who want to give feedback on this topic verbally. So I'm just going to read the survey question. To co-locate all the services needed to serve this population, what services should be co-located on site? At a resource center, check all that apply. And some of the feedback from the League of Women Voters meeting that I attended was it wasn't clear, is this all brand new? And so I put a note there that many of these services exist in Benton County, but are at different locations. And some of these services are not available anywhere in Benton County. things like a sobering center. That doesn't exist. We're working on the feasibility for crisis respite for mental health, but it doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing so that we can invite members of the public or board members to talk about this first component of co-location of services and what services are needed. And Tim Roach, are you still on? I know that you wanted to provide some feedback on this topic. Oh, please unmute yourself, Tim. And Lisa has a comment too. We'll have Tim first and then Lisa.
Yep. And thanks, Julie. Lisa really is delegated to speak on our behalf, on behalf of the Safe Place Steering Committee.
And Tim, would you share who you are with the rest of the board and people on the meeting so they know?
Sure. I'm Tim Roach. I'm a member of the Safe Place, Safe Camp Steering Committee, retired Presbyterian minister, and am very concerned about the resources we're able to offer to our community, and in particular, in response to those who are having a mental crisis issue. Right now, our resources, at least in my opinion, are very limited to be able to go to where these experiences are taking place and responding to that individual and that need in order to get them into the treatment pattern that is appropriate for them. But Lisa can speak to this very much better than I can. So let me defer to her, and I will back up everything Lisa has to say and ditto what her comments are. Thanks so much, Julie.
You can go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, thanks. Tim, you have no idea what I'm going to say, so that's a little dangerous. Risk for a Wednesday. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Lisa Hawash. I'm a resident of Corvallis, and I'm a member of the Safe Place Steering Committee, along with Tim and others. I'm also a professor at Portland State University School of Social Work. I've been working with folks experiencing houselessness for nearly 20 years now, and I think that Corvallis would really benefit from a cahoots model in this community. I think that no community is too big or too small to have this type of valuable resource. I think that I've seen different proposals around the centers and so forth, and this thinking of what comes first, what comes second, what comes third. A cahoots model actually, while a space to bring folks to for whatever is needed by that individual, a cahoots model, much of that kind of work of de-escalation and engagement, sometimes people don't need anything else. They just need to be able to talk to someone, and they need to be able to get some food and have a conversation, and then, you know, go on their way. So I just encourage us to not say, well, it has to go in a certain order, because a cahoots model could be the first thing that then later comes some kind of a center of some kind. The model itself is rooted in the care and concern for folks who are trying to survive outside, some of those whom have mental health or addiction challenges. In utilizing a cahoots model, it brings forward de-escalation strategies as well as connecting folks to vital supports in the community. And that's where figuring out what are the supports that are available here, and of course what's lacking. It's a multi-pronged approach, and a street-based outreach model developed sooner rather than later can be beneficial to our in-house community members and our neighbors as well. This model is human-centered and relies on professionals in mental health and homelessness service provision to be of support, and for us to not solely rely on law enforcement interventions. As many of you may know, Portland is engaging in a pilot called the Portland Street Response, and the research center that I'm a part of is doing the evaluation of that project in the Portland metro area. And then Salem is in early conversations and exploration of bringing in a cahoots model as well. So last week I attended a presentation by one of the folks that is a longtime employee of Cahoots, which is at the Whitebird Clinic. And the statistics that they reported I found super interesting. They had 105,000 calls come through the emergency management system last year in Eugene. 18,000 of those EMS calls were assigned to Cahoots workers. 16,000 of those 18,000 calls were completed without any other support, meaning fire or ambulance. And 311 of the 16,000 calls required police support. So when you think about as an intervention perspective and engaging with folks, just imagine, you know, you don't have law enforcement going to those other 15,700 calls, right? And also it's a, you know, those of us that are mental health professionals and social service workers have different skill sets than law enforcement. They are completely different professions. And so it's important for us to think about that. And as a person who has been doing this work for a long time, I teach social workers how to practice being social workers in the community. I personally would be happy to be involved in thinking about how this could look in our community. I've only lived here for just over 3 years, but I am here to stay, even though I still work in Portland. And so I just want to throw that out, that I just think, you know, this is something that could be super beneficial to the folks that many of us work alongside.
Lisa,
Thank you,
can I
Julie.
ask you a favor to please email me with those fabulous statistics that
Yeah.
you quoted from this model? And I think I'd also like to connect you with Commissioner Ojero, as she and John Haroldson, our district attorney, are on a work group with the Willamette Criminal Justice Council to explore and research and look at the feasibility of this. And I think your background might be very essential. I see
Thank
Zan
you.
nodding her head. Okay.
Yeah, I emailed Zan. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Commissioner.
Let's see here. Erica Koenig, did you want to say something? And then I know we have a couple things from Jim Moorfield and Joel Goodwin.
Hi, yeah, I'm Erica Koenig. Blair was mentioned, or Blair Gerard was mentioned earlier, and she's the president of the West Hills Neighborhood Association. She and I both would like to put our support behind advocating for a cahoots model. Just, you know, I think Lisa kind of covers it, but just to give the extra vote of confidence on that. So that's it.
Thank you, Erica, for attending and for your time. Thank you to Lisa as well. Thank you, Tim. It's really helpful to have this feedback from the public. So thanks for taking the time to attend the meeting. Jim, you said you have some thoughts, and then we'll go to Joel.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. One quick aside, and George Grosch may remember this, but way back in the early 80s, I helped run a street outreach program that was based on what Whitebird at the time was offering, which evolved in time into Cahoots. But locally in Corvallis, we ended that program partly because of opposition from police agencies and from Benton County Behavioral Health. So I look forward to a new day and a more professional operation than we had in the early 80s, frankly. It probably deserved to die back then, but I look forward to its resurrection, and because I think it's needed too. The comment I had, the list of co-located services, if I understood the structure of the question, it did not presuppose a particular population.
No, it does not. And I'll go ahead and share it again to bring it up here.
So-
This would be a resource center for any populations.
And so
But we
my-
do follow up and ask about which populations as far as emergency shelter.
Because my answer, if I were filling this out to this question, would be different for families and youth and chronically homeless. In other words, I would not mix those populations, therefore, which comes up in a different question, I know. But the format of question number one doesn't allow me to answer specific to a particular population. So if I were answering that in the context of chronically homeless men and women, I would list certain kinds of services that ought to be co-located. If I were answering that question in the context of homeless youth or homeless families with children, I would give a different answer. And so I just, I didn't notice that when you were asking for final edits, so I apologize. I had an opportunity to comment, but I didn't look at it, and so I'm commenting now.
Well, and I think with a resource center co-location model of services, it wouldn't matter who shows up and walks in the door, whether or not they're chronically homeless or they're there with a child, or it's a couple coming in. What services should be co-located to meet the needs of any individual?
Follow-up services that happen for those different populations. Just as an example, I would not think that a comprehensive service center for chronically homeless should be the service center for ongoing services to homeless teenagers or to families with children. I mean, if someone shows up for their first encounter, that's one thing. Because people will show up, lots of people will show up, and it makes perfect sense that then they get steered in certain directions. But if we're talking about a place that, say, provides shelter and provides food, I would want to start segregating those populations for reasons I could get into. But to me, it's pretty self-evident that that those populations, shouldn't routinely mix.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Joel, you had wanted to share something from Deschutes about the crisis services.
Yeah, just for the law enforcement perspective, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say this probably a little bit from the fire and EMT perspective as well. I wholeheartedly agree that better mental health resources are necessary. At the moment, if somebody is in crisis, police and occasionally fire EMTs are the only resource, especially in that, emergent situation. And increasingly in my 22 years in law enforcement, we have become the de facto social worker, crisis worker, mental health worker, because we're all that's there. So appreciate the successes of the CAHOOTS program and the interest in that. Would suggest that there might be other options to consider. Just recently became aware of some crisis services that look like they might be brand new in Deschutes County, or at least that's just my perspective of that. That might be another option, and I shared the link for that. Don't know a whole lot about it. It looks exceedingly promising. Sounds like it was funded by grants and other avenues. So there may be other solutions out there besides just the CAHOOTS program. There might be something in between, or a hybrid of that, or one or the other, or a third or fourth option may be out there as well. So I think just as with the rest of our engagement, we don't necessarily want to put all our eggs in one basket without necessarily looking at a lot of different options to see what the best fit is for our community.
Thanks, Joel. I pulled up that Deschutes one to be able to share with the board so that everybody can take the time to look through it. Let's see here. Sandy, you would like to make a comment. Where are you, Sandy? There we go.
Hi, I'm actually here on behalf of Matthew Rowan, who has started a nonprofit called Angel Grove. And he is actually out there in the field right now doing crisis interventions. And he has been trying to start like a whole like CAHOOTS sort of thing to begin with. So we would like to step in and help and do whatever we can as a nonprofit and be a huge part of that.
Thank you, Sandy. Would you mind emailing me, and I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat here so that you can connect with me.
Yeah.
George Grosh, you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, I do like the idea of a CAHOOTS model piece, and I think that that's something that certainly we need to look at in whatever form it takes. The idea of being able to have people that are going to come out and deal with situations that are dealt with normally by other agencies and other organizations, maybe not as effectively as they need to be because they're dealing with the wrong issue. I think it's a good idea. And also, I think we need to remember that everything we do is data driven. So I'm really interested in hearing about the data that's behind the idea of models like Cahoots. And so that would be one of the deciding factors as far as we go. And in general, though, I've seen how that model works and when it does work, and it's very effective, at least in my opinion. Is as to what Jim was saying about kind of how we look at groups of people. I think the data that we see and everything that we've kind of talked about so far has really had a pretty heavy focus on single men, because that's been kind of the largest area that we've had to deal with. I've always been working on the presumption and want to make sure that we don't lose track of what Jim was saying is there are other groups out there, and you don't necessarily always put everybody all together in one place because it's just not the right mix. And so we can't let other groups slide because we have a bigger a community problem downtown that we're trying to, in a large part around the community that we're trying to deal with in terms of single men, that we lose sight of the fact that there's still a large group of people out there that need help, but they just need it in other ways, and we need to be inclusive of that.
Thanks, George. Carol chimed in, also supporting Jim's thoughts about not having everyone on the same area for a significant period of time and clarifying that. I think that's why the model of a campus becomes appealing, to have a main resource center where anyone can come in the front door, and then have other areas where people can be served based on whether they're not, sober at the time and they're chronically homeless, and what they need is food and a new coat, or if they want help with rapid rehousing and job training and they're there with a child, and having some different areas where people can go based on the differing populations. Did you want to clarify that, Carol?
Well, I've been concerned about this because we've talked about it a couple of times, and I know Jim and I have both said, and now George has said that there was a little bit of concern, I would think, and I'm not sure Jim is saying this, even with the campus model. So we express these concerns, but the campus model keeps getting put forward again. And so I feel a little bit as though when I think about families, even on a campus, being in juxtaposition to various people with various troubles, that doesn't seem like a good mix. I mean, we're still talking about a finite amount of space. And so I've been into the assumption that the hub would pull people together, but then they would be farmed off to different locations. But this campus concept seems like it's starting to get legs, and I just have some concern about it, and I hope that we can push on that, continue to push on it, so that we all have the same level of comfort.
Well, and thankfully, one of the great providers here we have in time is community outreach, and they are a fantastic family shelter. Due to COVID, they haven't been able to accept any new clients, so they need some more capacity right now. But COI is the model of co-location of services, particularly for families, because they've got their medical clinic, behavioral health care, emergency shelter, transformative housing. So perhaps it's a matter of bolstering their capacity to serve in that function as the family co-location. And I think that's also what we'll get from some of the survey responses, as far as having separation of populations. Jim, you wanted to ask a question. Oh, sorry, Jim, before we go to you, Jim, Lennox had something they wanted to say.
Just a quick thing. Just because it's a family doesn't mean that those parents are going to be like stable and not, on some sort of substance, blah, blah. So like those parents may have a lot of the same needs as any other person who needs, a place to sober up or things like that. So, I mean, I don't want to assume that family is like this separate entity, because those adults usually have a lot of the same issues as other adults in the population.
Yeah, actually, Lennox, one of the first times I went over to deliver something to Sean at the hygiene center, he was talking about having encountered a little kid that came up to his waist with that kid's family, and that, yeah, exactly what you're talking about, that they might need the exact same kind of services, and would not qualify for services at COI because of barriers for sobriety. Jim, yeah.
I'm glad Lennox brought that up and your response, Julie, because, yeah, I mean, community outreach, well, I won't get into that, but they have restrictions on their services. And so, they're, at least as currently structured, not a solution to all the families, all the needs of all families. But I have a question for our guest, Lisa. And it may also be a question for Joel Goodwin. One of the things that I'm interested in is how police, when police are required, how police can also respond in a more flexible way. I've had very brief conversations in the past with Joel Goodwin, as well as other police, about community services officers. It's still who are, Joel can better define what they are than I can. But the question in my mind has been, when doing street outreach, it's clear to me that many situations require someone other than a uniformed, fully armed police officer. At the same time, that there are many situations that have a safety issue, and I guess the question is whether you're familiar with community services officers in the context of police departments, and what role they play in communities similar to Cahoots. Does that question make sense? I'm directing it to Lisa especially, but also to Joel.
I'm not sure. I mean, I am a community-based social worker, and so all of my work has been on the ground with folks prior to academia. I spent almost 8 years in Old Town Chinatown at Sisters of the Road, and we are tooled up and trained and constantly learning and unlearning and expanding our tools around de-escalation. And so our very last resort in Old Town Chinatown was to call the police. And most challenges were resolved between us with colleagues, and not just to the organization I was at, but talking more broadly about Old Town Chinatown, because historically services have been mostly centered in Old Town Chinatown, because that's where homeless services kind of were pushed. And over the last decade, they've been pushed out east, 81st all the way out to the 180s in East Portland. So maybe Joel can speak to the law enforcement side. And police were called when needed, but it was kind of like the information I gave about Cahoots, that most of the time it is dealt with by just engaging through this type of model. But when something escalates to a level that it's not safe, then the police are asked to come and help intervene.
A couple of thoughts to hopefully answer your questions, Jim. Regarding the outreach piece, there is a safety component that we would be worried about with folks as well. We have done, in a limited capacity, some outreach with a social worker from Good Sam, and then on occasion with crisis workers from Benton County Mental Health. And that was with a uniformed police officer. And I think there's two advantages to that. One is that having somebody from the police department, they know who sort of the higher impact folks are that we want to seek better engagement with. And then also it's the safety component. If you are dealing with somebody who's got mental health issues, or they have substance abuse issues, there's a degree of predictability that you can't rely on there. So with the model that we used, which was totally organic, it would be a law enforcement would make a first contact when it was appropriate, sort of gauge the situation. And then if the person was interested in having a discussion, hand them off to the social worker or the crisis worker, whichever is appropriate, and the law enforcement would step out of the picture completely from there. Your question about community service officers, we have community service officers here. They are not sworn police officers. They don't have arrest authority. They don't carry firearms or anything like that. They are uniformed to show that they are an official. Their role is essentially as support for law enforcement. So we no longer have animal control. They've taken that function. They'll help direct traffic at crashes. They'll help process crime scenes. If somebody's car was broken into and there's no suspect information, rather than just having our records department take the call, they will go out and take it. But they are not in any way, shape, or form crisis intervention specialists or anything like that. And it wouldn't be appropriate for them to do that. I'm aware of a few cases where community service officers have found themselves in a situation that probably should have been handled by somebody with the appropriate training and tools to deal with that kind of crisis. And it hasn't gone terribly well. So it's a good idea, but really that's not what a CSO is designed for in terms of a department employee. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thanks, Joel. I want to make sure that we are able to cover more of this topic. We have about 15 minutes left for it, and I think we've had good conversation about the CAHOOTS model and that Willamette Criminal Justice Council has a work group working on this, so I would encourage further discussion on that to be fleshed out there. But definitely, I've taken all of your comments here, and I will document them as part of the public feedback. In particular, Lisa, the comment that you had about there is no need to wait for anything else to be in existence, like a location, in order to move forward with a CAHOOTS-like model, because a lot of the issues that they address can be done in person. Reese has a comment, then Anita, then Zan.
Hi, I was kind of just following up on what you had just said about you don't have to wait, because I know a lot of people might think you need a police officer or with you. I would argue against that conception that anybody could go down and help their neighbors. But what's really the part of the CAHOOTS model that I see as being the most practical is the outreach workers. When people think of CAHOOTS, it's often thought that it's the police dispatch sending the outreach workers, and because that's how it works in Eugene. The call comes in, it goes to police dispatch, and they actually dispatch out the CAHOOTS. That's a dream here, but it might be too small of a community for that. But what we easily could do and need right away is just the outreach workers, just two people going out and taking care of the essential needs that the people out there, because there's people out there who end up out there with no tent and no sleeping bag, and somebody walking by, it's easy for them, just the outreach workers. And if they end up doing a managed camp, I would think that you could utilize the staff at the camp to do the outreach, at least in the downtown area. And certainly you might have to have, somebody driving to other locations, but.
Reese, we're getting into the weeds here. Is it okay if I move on to Anita and Zan?
Yes.
Thank you. Anita.
Hey, I wanted to speak a little bit to what Lisa said and Joel said, because I am the social worker that went out with Joel to do the crisis response. And, I think Lisa's point about the CAHOOTS model is well taken on one front in particular. Although it was lovely for me to go out with Joel, and I appreciated the security, as did the crisis worker that went out with us, I got feedback over and over again by the people in the community that we were visiting with, all unhoused, that they were uncomfortable talking to me in front of the cop and wish that the cop wasn't there. As nice and lovely as he was, they just weren't comfortable. And I think that is going to be consistent feedback you're going to get over and over again, right or wrong. It just is a point of view, right? That's pretty, I think, a dominant point of view. And I also wanted to piggyback on Lisa saying that the CAHOOTS model, I think, works beautifully because you have trained mental health professionals who are chatting you up. And the way a mental health professional talks to someone is different than anyone else. And in Corvallis, I've struggled about the crisis response piece because we don't have the facilities for mental health in Corvallis. We have next to nothing available. So if someone is having a nervous breakdown, let's say in layman's terms, they're not going to likely get inpatient mental health treatment, or they're going to be put on a long waiting list for outpatient. But what they could get, which would be very powerful, is someone sitting with them and spending the time with them who is a mental health provider, who is naturally and organically trauma debriefing them. And I think it would make a huge, huge difference. And I'm in support.
Thanks, Anita. Zan, last thing on this topic, and then we can move on to the other questions.
Can I add my name to the queue?
Sure.
I think that these are all great comments, and we really do need to hash this out and figure out what we can do on this topic. And I'm looking forward to doing so. Um, I know that folks at Oregon State University are also very, very interested in the cahoots type model. The way it works down there does require dispatch. And of course, that means that it can't be stood up overnight. There is a training component. There's that's pretty serious in terms of having them understand who needs to go to what kind of event. It's not only training of the first responders and the folks at 911, but just in the community so people know who to call and where and for what. But we'll get there. I have confidence because there's such a great interest right now in making the situation better. So this is a great conversation. Thank you.
Agreed. Alita.
Yeah, in closing this conversation, I would like to say we have such great need. I was just out in the mud. And cahoots, I've watched it for a long time. I think it's wonderful. I think that model, we should have it. And what Joel said about, well, maybe there's some intermediate models, we should have them too. We have an intermediate model right now, which is the SORT team, Street Outreach and Response Team. And it serves kind of a really cool niche. It's not trained for mental health, which cahoots would be, but it is that piece that touches base with people, provides them knowledge that there's someone who cares and that there's resources in the community. And they aren't accompanied by the police, which apparently is how they kind of like it. But I think that there's also a place for the police to accompany folks who go out to some of the scarier neighborhoods because they too need that personal touch. And so we need it all. I think that's just what I want to say.
Peggy also chatted, it's not either or, we need both. And Jim Moorfield as well. Crisis intervention and street outreach are not the same thing. And although you might have similar results or outcomes. So we have about 8 minutes left and I will defer to Zan and Alita and Brian's group about what other question you would like to focus on. So question 2 is about different populations. Question 3 is the attributes of a successful geographic location. Question 4 is amenities. And question 5 is services available to the surrounding neighborhood. And it sounds like we might need to spend another portion of time at next month's meeting or a separate meeting to be able to really cover this topic. But what are your thoughts, group 2?
Well, this is Alita. I think you're right. This is a huge topic and we could spend another time on it. But I think that those of us that put together the list for number 2 came up with some, quite threw the net out very widely. And so I can't think of too many more populations, but they're all on that list. And I think, as Jim pointed out, different populations do need separateness at some times and in some ways. So that one I think is pretty self-explanatory, but I think maybe just taking a few moments to look at question 3 about attributes of what it would be like for the geographic, because I go like, there's some very strong opinions about where things should be. And without saying why, that, I think we need to say more about what does it mean to have a successful geographic location and for whom are we defining success? I think I would like to look through the lens of the successfulness being how to make it successful for the population that we want to help.
Other thoughts from your group? Yeah, Zan?
I think that Alita hit on a good point just now, and that echoes some of what Carol and Jim and George were saying earlier. And that is that even if we may have an initial hub that's one place and have at least overnight housing there for a wide variety of populations, that at different points in people's journeys as they're trying to stabilize and once again be able to have a home, I think that the services they need are different. So I think that part of what we're missing in our survey is that temporal sense of path. And it's partly because of the way we separated out the questions across emergency shelter and transitional and permanent supportive housing. So that's part of why we're getting a little bit hung up. So that's my vision of any kind of a campus would not be that it would be a place for people would stay for any length of time. It's that first landing place. So I think we need to be a little clearer about what we're talking about, or become clearer as we have conversations in the community and develop that clarity.
Catherine, you put something in the chat. Do you want to share? And then I saw George raise his hand.
Yeah, so my concern is not that we get too far down this conversation, but I want to throw it out so we can seed a thought process. A campus model or a co-location model is going to take a lot of space, a lot of investment, and the core of it is obviously going to be in the area that has the highest need, which is going to be Corvallis. From a rural perspective of, you know, Adair, Monroe, LC, rural areas that aren't incorporated, Philomath, how and what means are we going to establish with this campus or co-location model that will make these services reasonably accessible to the rest of the county? And so it's just a seed of a topic for not tonight's meeting, but there's a lot of folks that are not going to have access just as a general principle without some sort of a conversation of what that accessibility might look like.
Thanks, Catherine. George?
You know, I remember we've talked a lot about how the service system already works, and a lot about silos, that people get put into silos, funding gets put into silos. And this conversation kind of reminds me just a little bit about that. What we're trying to find a way to do really and recommend is how do we cross over all of those different kinds of, not barriers, but the things that make us unique. You know, everybody needs the same type of service. They just need to be provided in different ways. And part of what strikes me about this is we haven't talked about is at the end of the day, we still need units of housing to put people. And so we can provide some emergency services and some services to begin to transition people. But if they don't have a permanent place to stay, that just slows things down and makes it harder.
Thanks, George. I think when the executive committee meets again, and probably via email, I'll talk with group 2 about how we can plan another discussion session to get to the other components of this topic, to flesh out these details more and to have public feedback more on the other 3 questions from this survey. Any last minute thoughts on this topic? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and transition over to Dr. Aguilar's equity training. I wanna thank everybody from the general public who attended today and gave feedback and showed up in the evening at this meeting. It's really very appreciated. So thank you. And please follow up via email. My email is in the chat. If you have anything else you'd like to share with the board, links or statistics that would be informative. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you, Jade, and share the screen for your training. Go ahead.
Not a good way to start on mute.
You're fine.
Yes. I think we're all used to that by this point. Thanks for having me. I am really grateful. I know that you have a very full agenda and a lot of big decisions and important choices to make as you move forward on your work. So I'm really grateful that you are also taking the time to think about these issues and consider how they play into your work in this realm. And I'm hopeful that we can not only talk about the concepts, but we can think about how they apply here really specifically, because I think that's some of the frustration sometimes with this kind of work is it's hard to figure out how to take a concept and then figure out how exactly to apply it to the thinking that's happening. So I'm hopeful that we can do that, and also that we can keep this fun and interactive and keep everyone engaged. I know this is the end of probably a long day for you. On top of that, you have had a board meeting today, and I'm guessing you're pretty exhausted. So I'm going to stay positive and enthusiastic, and hopefully that energy will help drive you as well. So
Jade, I just want to tell you real quick, the first poll question you have is just going to be verbal with the slide, but that second poll question, the last one, I incorporated it into a poll for Zoom to be interactive. And when you want to go to your next slide, you can just hold your finger up if you'd like, because I can see you.
Okay, perfect. I think we have all heard DEI and kind of it just runs now together like just these 3 letters. And I don't think we ever, or we don't often spend enough time to really unpack how those words, what they really mean and how they interact together. And so I brought to you these 2 kind of sayings that I've heard in a lot of these kinds of trainings. One, I don't have a attributable source to, but I like it. And so I brought it forward. And then another one is a really common phrase that you may have heard before. So we'll start with the first one. Diversity is a fact. That's just an exclamation that, we know that increasingly Oregon, our nation, are just becoming more racially diverse. And so it isn't something that we necessarily need to do anything about, but it is something that we need to recognize is happening and then consider how at all levels of power and organizations in our society that we need to make sure that that representation is happening at those levels. So I think that's just what it's, reflecting there. And then inclusion, which we can spend a little more time on in this, the next quote, I think is a good place to start to think about that. It's a practice, right? Something that some actions that we're taking in order to make our organizations, our communities, our workplaces, more inclusive settings for diverse folks, for folks who have been marginalized. And then the last one is where I think we'll probably spend the most time on these concepts, is the concept of equity, because I think it's, we've seen the graphics and I brought those here today again, but I think finding a working definition of equity, and especially as it applies to work, because sometimes it's hard to see a graphic that kind of explains equity and say, okay, I get it, but like, what does that look like when I'm thinking about housing access? And so that's what I'd like to spend some time on today. So this next one, Verna Myers is a really very well-known DEI consultant, trainer, and does work with all major corporations. And she often uses this phrase that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And so I want you to all think about a party that you have recently been to. And Julie, if you want to go to the next slide, I put some images here I just Google imaged parties. And so these are just random people. I don't know them, but they come up in the images for parties. And
Jade, you're making me miss life.
I know, right? So yes, but I'm guessing, Julie, you and others in the group are looking at these parties and some of them look more fun to you than others. And I think the point here is that being invited to a party and being asked to dance isn't the one thing that makes me feel included when I go to a party. So my question for you is, and you can put this in the chat, I'm hopeful, or just jump in if you feel like it. What does make you feel like you're at a party that is a party that, is one that you really want to be at and that you belong at that party? I'll give folks a moment. How do you know when you're at your party?
Jim is being a joker and saying, isn't being a parent of young children a constant party? Yeah, so it's a 24/7 one, Jim. I'll just jump in and say food that you recognized and tastes good to you because you've grown up with it.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Anyone else?
Catherine has said value as an individual.
Okay, great conversation.
Having fun.
Yeah, you're having fun. There's, the music is the kind that, you like and you want to dance to that, and people get you without having to explain yourself. People are including you in the conversation. You understand the language, including the slang. I love that one because I'm guessing at some of these parties I might not get that slang anymore. A place where I'm seen as I am. So I think you all, fully get this, that like being asked to dance, actually, in my mind, I want to push Verna a little bit on that one and say, like, in some cases that might not make you feel very included at all. It might make you really uncomfortable. But what inclusion really looks like is fully feeling like you can be your full self at this, whether it's a party or whether it's your workplace or others, that, someone has thought about the kinds of things that make you feel like a whole and valued person. So maybe that's I encourage you to go to work tomorrow and take a fresh set of eyes to your workplace. Well, okay, I say that, and I realize now everybody's workplace is their home, but you could even do it at your house. Like, do a geographical scan of what you have hanging in the home, or think about what your workplaces are like, and think about, do we make them inclusive? Who's hanging on the wall? What do we value as important in those spaces? What kind of music gets played in those spaces? What kind of food gets served in those spaces? All of those things create experiences that we either feel like we truly belong somewhere and we feel respected, and that this is a place that they see us, or a place where we might not, that we feel like othered. And I think that's where we really want to work towards, is like, I'm hearing you talk about a really amazing new potential campus. I'm hopeful that it happens for you all. But just thinking about what that might look like in terms of how to create a really inclusive space. And I've seen that you already have a lot of
There is someone unmuted. If you could please mute yourself. We're getting lots of feedback. Thank you.
Yep. So here's just some shared definitions in terms of, maybe like official definitions from groups. And I think they're a good place to start. And I'm happy to share these slides with Julie and make them available to anyone who wants to have them or share them or use them. So diversity, is just the presence of different types of people from a wide range of identities, maybe with different perspectives, experiences. I'm often asked, and especially in this role, well, what counts as diversity? And I think, that's going to be a self-determination that every group is going to make. Some people, in certain spaces recognize that they might not have a lot of gender diversity, and they really want to work towards being more inclusive for women or men, or non-binary folks, and recognizing that that's an area they might need to think about diversity. Others, racial and ethnic diversity, of course, age diversity, ability. I mean, you name it. I think it's worth being thoughtful about who is showing up at different levels of your organization, whose voices are being heard, and really thinking about it. I think what happens is that people sometimes end up using, well, we are diverse, we are diverse in these ways, that they're using it more as a cover for why they're not diverse in certain other ways, right? And so I'm not saying that those are bad things. I think having, diversity of thought and political experience and background and all that can be a really relevant and useful element for any organization, but it shouldn't be the cover that helps you avoid the fact that you aren't having diversity among other elements of identity, that especially ones that we know are really often excluded and marginalized. So that's the answer I would put towards what counts as diversity. And then of course inclusion, and we talked about this with the party. It's just creating an environment where folks feel involved, respected, connected, and they can really bring their full self, which includes their, the richness of their ideas and their backgrounds and their perspectives, to the table, to the event, to the workplace, and show up and feel like their ideas have merit and are relevant.
Jade?
Yeah.
Here's the concern I have when I've been at many of these meetings, as we all have, and conversations, is and again, probably as many of us have been doing, I've been reflecting on the election, and I've been reflecting on some of the comments that have come from people whose candidate for president did not win. And it's one thing if you have an audience that's receptive, you hear this and we all get very excited about it, but I have family that don't get excited about it. And so how do you introduce the topic of diversity? They just immediately go, oh, you're just doing one of those liberal things again, and you just, you don't even care about white people, and on and on and on and on. And I don't think those are atypical. And so as we think about, I don't because I'm retired, but as you think about your workplace and you have a variety of political views and opinions, have you encountered that sort of conversation, and how do you get through it in a way that doesn't end up just, in fisticuffs practically, if that makes sense to you?
I mean, I totally hear that. And I think that, a lot of people are experiencing that, especially right now in this heightened political climate that we're having. I think it's really important to meet folks where they are and in their thinking and their journey, not necessarily to meet them there and end there. But if there's any opportunity to get, I think if certain words are words that immediately put people in a place of either feeling defensiveness or they're tuning out because that's some liberal agenda that they don't want to hear anything about. I think our hope is that we find avenues in, right? We find some way to maybe not use the words diversity, inclusion, and equity. If those are the words that are going to immediately set someone in a place of I can't learn anymore, how do we share these concepts in ways that they do understand? And I think that's the challenge that we take on, because we're working with folks who we need to get on board, and we need to help them move forward in this thinking.
Will you be talking to us about this later? Because
I'm happy to. Let's talk about that for one of our future things. I think I just sent some options to Julie, and I think we can add that to the list, because I think it's a really good and important point right now.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Julie, and move us forward. Okay, so here you may have seen some graphic that looks similar to this, but it's usually with some people trying to watch like a baseball game. I like this one because I think, accessing books feels maybe a little bit more important or something. Maybe it's because I'm not a baseball fan, but this is the definition. Oh, I think we actually didn't talk about equity, and yeah, let's go back one slide. Sorry, I realized we never got to that one. So equity, right? The state and process of ensuring equally high outcomes for all, and removing the predictability of success or failure that currently correlates with any social or cultural factors. So it's a lot, kind of a long and wordy definition, but what I'm trying to get at here is that your race or your ethnicity or any marker of your identity shouldn't predict whether you would have a higher chance of experiencing homelessness. It shouldn't predict whether you have a higher chance of making it to college, or whether you have a higher chance of getting COVID-19 or living in an area that's polluted. But it does, and we know that it does. We know that race and ethnicity and ability and gender and all of those things really shape our lives and predict outcomes for us that can make or break a healthy and long life. And so that I think equity, when we think about what it really means as an outcome, is that those markers wouldn't predict that, right? That there might be other social factors that do, but that shouldn't be and wouldn't be a predictor of our outcome. We think about equity as a process. It also means, how do we get there? What steps do we need to take to make sure that that outcome means it wasn't predicted by those factors? And so I hope that is a little bit clearer. I think that's a really important concept for us to be considering. Okay, Julie, go ahead. Now we're back to our stools. We often see this slide, which is the equality versus equity. And we see here that if we just give everybody the same resource, which in this case is a little stool, that might not be what everybody needs. And in this case, we can see that one person, it was sufficient for them on the left, and that for the other person, it's not enough. And it doesn't help them achieve the outcome, which is to get the books on the top, right? And so what I, have as my second question there, and I'd love your thoughts on, instead of giving folks different size stools to meet their needs, what else could be done here? I mean, we see that as one solution is to help the person there that's the shorter person and say, what you need is a taller stool, and we can give you that. What other solutions do you see here in this image?
You could lower the shelf.
You could lower the shelf, right? And that, or you could put the books on the ground, or,
right.
And so I think what I'm trying to get at here is that there's the access kind of solutions where we try to give resources in disproportionate amounts based on what people actually need, or we can do some structural change too, which is to reimagine this system of putting the books on the top shelf and instead restructure it so that one way is if the books are on the ground, then everybody would be able to get to them and that wouldn't be an issue. Now, I know this is like like a metaphor. So I'm asking now if anyone can think of some idea about like, what are the barriers to access when it comes to housing, and what might be some either stool solution or some move the book solution? That's a big question, but I figured I'd throw it out there. And if it's not for right now, then I hope that's the big question that you take away from this, is thinking about it.
Well, this is a lead on. I'm just thinking of, having books everywhere at different levels, whatever. That's the metaphor, but for having housing at all different levels so
Right.
that anyone can access it at whatever ability they have. So we have to have housing that's not just on a top shelf. And I
Right.
think that that's where we're at right now in this community. The shelves are too tall for a lot of the people that I see in my daily work.
I love that. That's a great and perfect example. Just having different kinds of housing, whether it's for larger families, smaller families, tiny housing. I've heard that come up in, transitional housing, all kinds of ways that give people access to something that they currently don't have.
Well, and I thought of the reverse of that too, Jade, of like rental assistance, like constantly giving people rental assistance is the stool. So giving a higher stool so that they can pay that higher rent. But what would solve it without having to do the ongoing rental assistance is what Alita said, which is a house they can actually afford.
Right. One of the critiques of this this graphic is looking at the shorter person there, the one who's having trouble reaching. They said that this might be an inherent issue with the person, and that she's short, and that this is something something about her that's the problem. Or I'm making assumption. I said her. I have no idea what gender this short person is. But so that if you extend that metaphor, this idea that like maybe people who don't have access to whatever it is, whether that's housing or whatever, that might reflect that there's something wrong with them, and so that why this image isn't really that useful. And I want to challenge that, because I'm a short person, and I don't feel at all like that's a barrier for me. The barrier is actually in the things that are designed for someone who's not my size, right? So if I think about where I am limited in ability to reach something, or an ability to get somewhere or step up on something, it's not me that's the problem. It's the normative understanding of what an appropriate size counter should be, or an appropriate size chair should be. And that's the issue that we're trying to address here. So there's nothing wrong with this person. What's wrong is that we've built a system that isn't designed for all kinds of people. We've built it for, not even honestly for the person on the left, because they can't reach the books either. But so I want to challenge this notion that there's any inherent thing, that it's actually our systemic issues that need to be addressed to deal with in this case, the size issue, but in your case, the housing issue. Okay. Thanks. I hope you don't mind that I'm plowing quickly through this, because I know we have a very limited time. But please stop me and jump in at any point if you have a comment or a question.
I have a comment.
Yep. Okay.
I was struck by how equity and inclusion in different ways that they meet up, because equity can't happen unless inclusion happens. And I think about who we are, this group. We're a public body. We have 3 elected officials on this committee, and I'm reminded of a project I worked on years ago that had to do with establishing a property maintenance code in Corvallis, and the idea was that a lot of people who are affected by substandard housing really ought to be showing up at some of these meetings to comment on their experience of living in substandard housing. But the problem was they were expected to speak in English, and they were expected to tell their story within 3 minutes or less. They were expected to stand up in front of a room full of people and be able to tell that story in 3 minutes or less. And there were certain things they weren't supposed to do, like that were unspoken, like complain about their landlord. No landlord names were supposed to be mentioned in public. And so the list goes on, and it was like,
right.
It was
structural barriers.
There were significant barriers for people feeling included.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I think, recognizing that, having the ability to see that those are the barriers, instead of just saying like, well, we invited people and who knows, maybe they didn't come because there's no problems. That's the lens that you all have to have, right? That's the equity lens. You're saying like, if people aren't coming, it's probably because there isn't a problem, or isn't not a problem. It's because there's something else going on. And how do we unpack that? Even though I myself, and Jim, you probably too, feel pretty comfortable talking in front of a larger group of people, and in 3 minutes you can make your point, and you can do it in English, that, you know, but for a lot of people, those are really big barriers. And I think having just an awareness of those barriers is really the key element here, because otherwise you don't know how to address and go around them. Okay, so intersectionality, I think, is another word that often gets just used and commonly thrown out there, and I don't know that there's a full understanding really of what it means. And so I want to unpack it a little bit and give you an example. So we have all of these different identities. We are not, you know, one thing, and they intersect with each other. And sometimes they intersect in ways where some of our areas where we might face certain oppressions are counteracted by the fact that we have other privileges that we can help manage those. Sometimes we see compounding effects where we see somebody who has, you know, a disadvantaged identity in this way, but then in addition, being a woman of color, for instance, maybe doubles or compounds and overlaps their disadvantage. So in order for us to really be thoughtful about how to work on structure and work on changing systems, we need to see how these things intersect and interact together. And so I think one of the ways I'm going to show you that is through the wage gap. So before you go to Julie, I'm guessing we all kind of know this general notion of the wage gap, and we often hear about it in a random cents to dollar amount. So in the chat, somebody tell me what you think the current wage gap is, what the dollar that women make to what men make. Okay. Barbara has not checked recently, because I was remembering 77. We're currently at 82, which is yes, some kind of, I guess, small, you know, good thing. But if we go to the next one, I want to share with you how that really flattens, right, identity, and it doesn't really reflect what's going on across a lot of things. So this is a confusing chart. So let me help you look at it. I'm looking at the red one on the left right now. So at the top, it is about age and education. And so I'm gonna have some questions for you. At the top of this graph, do you all see my little arrow here or no? No, okay, I'm guessing no. All right, so at the top of the graph where it says 45 to 54, that's the age. And the women at the top of that are, and this batch of colors at the top are those are women with advanced degrees. So if we look at the ones at the top, which is 68 cents, that's a 45 to 50-year-old woman with an advanced degree. And she makes only 68 cents to the dollar of a man with also an advanced degree, and who makes the full dollar. At the bottom, so we're looking at the very top bar and then the very bottom bar. The very bottom bar is our least educated youngest woman. The least educated youngest woman is making 85 cents to the dollar that a man makes. So who would like to help us understand, maybe at least for the first one, why that well-educated older woman is making the least amount of all of these women compared to men, their age and their education level? And there isn't one right answer, so there's lots of answers.
I'm guessing it's because at least among younger women who are high school dropouts, they actually have the possibility of getting in some well-paying jobs, whereas women with an education are steered into low-paying jobs.
Well, I'm thinking the women with advanced degrees are probably getting pretty good jobs, I'm hoping.
I have a theory.
Okay.
Because I was in the force for 35 years.
Okay.
It's who is at the top?
Say more.
Who's hiring? Who's in charge of the department?
Yeah.
That's usually someone with a vested interest in, it's usually male. And they're looking for, I think they look for people that are more like them to be part and parcel of the group. And there's some co-opting that they like to you know, in order to get an agenda done, that's a necessary thing. And so I think it's just maybe a preference, if you will.
Yeah.
But are you saying they're not getting promoted at that level? So you get, they're hit the glass ceiling?
Oh yeah, and I think there's some issue with not being aggressive. Women aren't aggressive toward, you know, being promoted. Well,
Right, but that doesn't explain the gap. That
Well,
doesn't
it
explain
might
what.
in the sense that, yeah, there's, I see here, there's, you know, for cultural norms 40 years ago, somebody wrote that. I think that's something. I think there's, you know, potentially the women, you know, I know we always say this, well, they don't negotiate as well. Well, you know, the reality is that women who do negotiate also sometimes get punished for that, for being too aggressive. So there's a careful balance that women play. I would also argue that women at that age group and advanced degree level are also married to folks who have advanced degrees and make a lot of money. So they have more flexibility to potentially take on different kinds of roles that pay less. So there's just a lot of dynamics that are happening across age, education level, you know, family structures, et cetera, that help us maybe unpack a little bit what the nuances are. I know we're moving quickly, but what about the least pay, or the folks at the very bottom who are the high school dropout? That dark red line is a high school dropout, 25 to 34-year-old woman who's making 85 cents to the dollar to men, which is the most than we can see across all of those groups.
I think what I was trying to say before is that there are certain industries that tend to be that have more women in them than men, and vice versa.
Okay.
And the industries that are dominated by women tend to be lower paid, like caregiving.
Yeah.
But for jobs that don't require a higher education, there's a whole category of jobs that are kind of laborer jobs that actually pay fairly well.
Yeah.
That may have both men and women in them. They're not necessarily dominated by one gender.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm seeing a lot of great.
I would also say that that high school dropout rate is higher because minimum wage sets a you know, across the board, male or female, a wage.
No, I'd ask for me, why is it so difficult for me to look at this chart and be able to say, look at who makes the decisions about where the spending happens? It's not anybody that's on that chart. And who is it that makes decisions about what our culture looks like and about what the rules in our society are? It's not anybody that looks like the people that are on that chart. And so how do we ever get to the place, and Carol talked about this earlier, how do we ever get to a place as a society where we can even have that discussion? Because it's a social and a political and a cultural discussion. And as soon as you begin to have it and you say what the problem is, it's a men's problem. You know, I mean, we've got a men's problem in the world. And why is it so hard to acknowledge that?
Thank you, George. All right. I just want to acknowledge that, you know, we can unpack this chart, I think, for the next, you know, hour and a half. There's a lot there. And there's even ways that you can like zoom in on specific counties in Oregon. I mean, once you get into the data, there's just a lot of interesting nuance to it. And I think all I'm really trying to get at is that when we don't think intersectionally, we lose a lot of that nuance, and we start to think of people in these really, you know, specific identity groups and don't see them as like complete folks with a lot of potential privileges and areas where they are facing oppression and disadvantage. We could see here from this one is about race. There's a whole other chart that I didn't include because I knew we wouldn't have time of talking about sexual orientation and how that affects the wage gap. But I want to say one thing before we move on to this slide. In all of these examples, it's compared to white men, right? Like this white man is the $1, and we all look at how we compare to that. And I want to just push back on that because I think it flattens something for us, which is what if some of these were the dollar, and then we could say, well, white men are making $1.18 to what white women are making, or, you know, and it's like we could see privilege instead of always seeing the oppression side, and we can recognize where people are getting, you know, paid more instead of it being the neutral normal is the white male. And so I want to go to the next slide because I think this ties in. This is a complicated, you know, figure, but if you can see on the top are all of the sort of identities and places where privilege exists in our society. So we have male and masculine, white, European, heterosexual, able-bodied, and then you can go across and see the more oppressed and marginalized identity, directly down from it. And we often think of our bookshelves are designed for the folks at this top half of the graph. They're the neutral, normal, we don't even think of, they're the people, whereas the people below it are the ones who have something marked in front of it, right? We say like, oh, this is a doctor. Oh, this is like a woman doctor, right? We mark it in that way to identify it as not natural. So the 82 cents measured against this natural $1 mark for white men. And so I just want to, I just think this is worth spending a little more time with later and thinking about how society is actually built to support the folks on this top part. And then the people on the bottom are facing the barriers to access that we're talking about in terms of equity, which I know you're already thinking about because I just saw it on your last slides. All right, last few slides. Okay, it's 6, so we got to hurry. Putting it all together, right? So if we think about equity in housing work or any kind of work, it means that we're going to think about fair and just distribution of resources and opportunities. We're going to create social and economic systems that are sustainable and that sustain all people, right? So restructuring our organizations, making sure that that short person who couldn't reach the books is meaningfully engaged in, the planning of how are we going to reorganize this? Because without having that voice at the table, it might not have come so easily that we're like, I just put the books on the floor, or at least some of the books on the floor, because that voice wasn't there sharing with us how they're feeling like they can't access the thing. Authentically embodying racial equity and empowerment principles, and then having a bold and courageous long-term commitment to unearthing racism or other isms, root causes, and addressing barriers. Okay, so the last...
Jade,
Yep.
Jade, let's do the polls at a separate racial history of Oregon training.
Okay, so coming next, please stick around for the next one. We really want to dive deeper into the racial history of Oregon and make sure that we're thinking about it in ways that are continuing to impact the work that you're all doing here. And I got to take a break. I'm hopeful that you followed along. I'm happy to share the slides and talk more with anyone who would like to think or talk more about any of it. So thank you for sticking around. Julie?
Thank you, Dr. Aguilar. All of your slides are going to be included in what gets posted on the website and shared with the board. But Dr. Aguilar also is going to be involved in planning a training for this board about the racial history of Oregon. And so we were going to touch upon that, but I think we will save those teaser slides for the full in-depth presentation and conversation. So thank you, Jade. Any questions for Dr. Aguilar or questions about where we are in this process? How are you all feeling? Getting a thumbs up from Lennox, Reese, George, Zan, Barbara, Bruce, Alita, Jim.
Could you quickly just touch on what we're doing with our next meeting?
Sure. So the next 2 months will be huge public engagement and a collecting of survey feedback. And the executive committee will meet in the first part of December to talk about what else is needed and how we can best use that December meeting and whether or not we use it to cover more of this priority topic 2, or if we use it to cover portions of the other priority topics. And so I don't think it's yet been decided exactly how we're going to use the December meeting. Zan, did you want to chime in on that? No. Okay. I don't have a distinct answer for you yet, Nikki, but the exec committee sets the agenda and it'll be based on where we are in the public engagement, looking at the meetings that have been attended, what other feedback we need on priority topics. I think we know after this one that we need some more time for priority topic 2. And I'll also touch base with the different work groups about how they'd like to schedule a community listening session in the month of December for their topic. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I will document the public feedback and the discussion and the support for different items so that we can incorporate it into the public feedback for this board. Thank you all. I hope you have a great evening. It's great to see your faces.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again. Thanks, Dr. Aguilar, for your time.
Thank you. Great meeting, Julie.
Thanks, Bruce. You take care.